on screen, which is always lovely. And I think I have all the IT stuff underway, so we're going to get moving today. I want to thank everybody for joining us for a panel on increasing opportunities for sexual offender housing in your community. My name is Jennifer Nail. I'm the reentry coordinator for the Cincinnati region. I'm with the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections Office of Reentry. And I think it is fair to say that this is a really tricky topic to navigate. Anyone interested in reentry knows that without opportunity, it is unreasonable to have expectations for success. And those opportunities are hardest to find for people with a history of sexual offenses. Additional restrictions like registration and residency requirements place even more limits on this particular population. And in a lot of counties, though, with those with sexually based offenses aren't even allowed to use the homeless shelter system. But I think it's also fair to say that communities are not made safer when people are forced to live on the fringes and are unable to access shelter, much less housing. So this really touchy topic comes down to issues of public safety. How can we provide opportunities while at the same time doing what needs to be done in the name of public safety? So the panel that we've assembled today are professionals who are out there walking that line of opportunity and good practice. And I'm incredibly excited to get into this topic today. But I want to start with having our panel introduce themselves. So Chris, Julius, and Brianne, if you could each pop in, introduce yourself, describe your professional role with a little bit about what you do and how it impacts the sex offender population, please. Brianne, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. My name is Brianne Gamble. I am the program assistant and case manager for Faith Mission's Returning Home Ohio program. So how that kind of affiliates me with sex offenses is many of our clients actually do have former sex offenses along with SPMI. So
awesome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Julius, what's going on?
Hey, hello. I'm Julius Johnson from Lexington, Kentucky. I'm Director of Reentry Services for Lexington Rescue Mission. We have tons of people that have sex offense charges on their record, and so we were working endlessly to find them housing throughout the state of Kentucky, Southern Ohio, Indiana, wherever place we can send them to. So this is right along with what we do.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Nice to see you again. And Chris Galley, how are you today?
Good, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Galley. I'm the Chief of the Bureau of Community Sanctions at the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections. And it's a lot of words basically to say I administer several different programs, one of which is the Returning Home Ohio program. So we have the contract with Corporation of Supportive Housing, which operates some of that, and then they fund different providers, which I think Brianne will probably talk about maybe at some point during today. I also contract with, we'll just say, independent housing providers. We call them community residential centers, but basically it's just individual houses, apartments, and many of the returning clients, some of them will be sex offenders. We also have a program called the Community Transitional Housing Program, very similar to the CRCs. We oversee that. I oversee the contracts for halfway houses in Ohio, a few of which will actually accept clients with sex offenses. And like I mentioned, the permanent supportive housing. And then I have a whole nother side of my section that does grants to probation departments. I also was a parole officer that carried a sex offender caseload 25 years ago, and held a position called a sex offender specialist, which basically was kind of a manager that helped with parole officers who had sex offender caseloads, and helped work on housing and different types of barriers and issues. So I've been kind of on a couple different sides. Currently, I'm an administrator, have been for the past 15 years.
Well, thank you all for being here. And I think it's fantastic, the diverse array of experience that we have on today's panel. So to kick us off, Brian, you mentioned that a lot of your caseload has also severe and persistent mental illness. Can you describe a little bit the overlap you see in the population between SPMI cases and sex offenders when it comes to housing? What does it mean for housing when a client has both of those things in their situation?
It is definitely a challenge when dealing with housing as sex offenses. I know with the majority of our clients, their sex offense actually happened during a period of time where they were either in psychosis, they were experiencing extreme depression, their mental health had decompensated. So when they were not stable within their mental health, a lot of times that's actually when they committed the crime, was when their mental health wasn't stable. So putting the supports in place, getting them linked with community outpatient mental health, as well as frequent check-ins, and kind of knowing what their signs and symptoms are of, hey, they may not be doing okay, is pretty critical with not only finding them housing, but keeping them housed as well.
Yeah, and that continuity is so important, right?
Right.
So I anticipate a lot of overlap in the responses that I'm about to get to this question. But what challenges and or pushback do you folks encounter when you're trying to identify new opportunities for housing with this population? Julius, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, for me, I think it's a lot of political. Yeah, the challenge is the community is scared, and a lot of times the people with the power are trying to scare the community more and more and more, and give them misinformation. A lot of times, and I say this because I was on I led a program that was called Justice Involved Registrants, and it was the Department of Corrections in Kentucky. There was the sheriffs in Fayette County, Lexington, and the probation and parole, and they all came together and they said that, I mean, everything that we would say as far as a lot of lies are going on right now, and but they don't have anything to do with politicians. uh I feel a block to try to help us out, you know what I'm saying, when it comes to some of those things. So I think the biggest pushback is from the community and the political landscape. Nobody wants to say enough is enough.
Or Chris, is that in keeping with your experience?
Sure. Yeah, so in terms of challenges, obviously the registration laws, which I'm sure they're probably similar in Kentucky, but the registrations laws basically restrict where someone with a sex offense can possibly live. So that reduces, it just eliminates places right off the bat. So even if sometimes we may have different vendors that may come across different properties, if those properties are within 1,000 feet of a school, they may be able to house other people, but they won't be able to house folks with sex offenses. And Jennifer, as you already mentioned, they can't even go to a homeless shelter. So they are truly basically on the streets. at that point if we can't find them a place to go. Rural areas are very challenging and difficult. Also, kind of for the opposite reason, there's just not a lot of housing that's available. And there aren't very many vendors that would be willing to house to people with sex offenses. The stigma is real. They are basically what I would call, today's lepers. That no one wants to deal with them. They'll deal with all sorts of other different types of issues and crimes, but sex offenses generally are usually the worst. And then if you do sprinkle on some mental illness on top of that, that makes it extremely challenging. And it just gets very frustrating. I've have vendors I just lost literally a week or two ago. We thought we had a house in Cuyahoga County in Cleveland that we were going to be able to use just for housing, and basically the political aspect of that, they couldn't get occupancy because of who they were going to be housing, and therefore the vendor basically has given up on that. So that's definitely the biggest issue and challenge.
Right. Yeah, I think that's in keeping what we have all run into at some point. So I mentioned in my introduction that I approach housing opportunities for this population as an issue of public safety, and that we can't expect folks to consistently make pro-social choices if we are limiting their opportunities to the point where in some cases we're forcing them to live in a tent or forcing them to sleep in a park, which by the way has also been criminalized. So how important is it, do you folks think, to be consistent with the message that housing access can enhance public safety rather than compromise it? And have you found an especially effective way to share that message? Brianne, I know Returning Home Ohio is sometimes working with like scattered site independent landlords. Have you had any success in that field?
Yeah, we do have a few landlords that are willing to accept sex offenses. I know, there is a really big community stigma surrounding sex offenses. I don't think people realize just how easy getting a sex offense could be. It could be going to the wrong website. It could be talking to someone and not knowing their actual age, so everybody has a story behind what happened. And a lot of times I will advocate with landlords specifically for the client that I want to select for that unit. Keeping clients housed does allow them to maintain services. So as I said before, a lot of my clients actually committed the crime when they were not linked for services, decompensating, mental health, etc. It's much harder to keep track of people when they're on the land than it is in housing. It's much harder for support staff to find them, to work with them. It's much harder for case management to work with them. So actually keeping them housed would allow them to become stable and actually be productive citizens of society post release from incarceration.
Yeah, to let those services do their job, right? And accomplish those goals. Absolutely. I get that. Do you see any untapped opportunities in the future? Julius, what about Kentucky? Is there something on the horizon that you think might be effective?
I would say just the way to approach some of the, I like what somebody said earlier. I was listening in on the conversation. They didn't call them landlords. They said housing, something I got it written down. But it is to get and gather people and then to educate the people that have the houses and to educate them that about what we expect and what we're looking for in housing, and tell them all the things about sex offenses and stuff like that, and find a small group to kind of that's willing to learn and educate. That's what we're finding successful, is finding people that are willing to listen to us, and that's a small victory, but that's a victory we like to just stand on and roll with.
Mhm. Yeah. So Chris mentioned, that sex offender registration requirements and residency restrictions already narrow the pool of potential options. So Chris, is there anything in your opinion that the public does not know about sex offender registry requirements that you wish folks understood better?
Well, yeah. Just don't know if I can say it as plainly as I'd like to. You know, all sex offenders, they don't commit the same type of offenses. They're not all the same. There are different risk levels of sex offenders. Everybody thinks, as soon as you say sex offender, you think trench coat, guy in a van, driving down the street, throwing little girls in his car and driving away and doing horrible things. And that is actually the exception, not the rule in terms of, most crimes that are sex offenses. But I would like to go back to your other question and throw something out there in terms of, is there anything on the horizon, or is there any kind of idea out there? So for Ohio, we do have a small, limited group of agencies that are willing to at least house and work with these folks. My department gets calls all the time, and perhaps maybe some other people on in this session and in your other work, you get these types of phone calls. You get, well, my grandmother just died, and I just inherited this house on this other side of town, and I want to help people with housing coming out of prison. And but you start talking to them a little bit. They've never done it before. It's just a house, and they're just kind of looking for a way. Their heart is in the right place, but I don't think they really know what they're getting themselves into. So the one thing, so we used to just kind of give them all of our information, our request for proposal, which is like a 30-page document of all the requirements. And there's almost no way that they're going to be able to do all of that. Plus, one of our requirements is you must be housing people for a year to even be eligible to meet any of our contracts. So instead of doing that and probably never hearing from them again, we're starting to try to link them to our vendors that we currently have contracts with, and try to see if they can work something out. So if XYZ agency currently has a contract with us, we know they know what to do. We know they meet all the requirements as an agency. Now it's just a matter of increasing the volume of units that they have. So that person with grandmother's house is an opportunity in a third-party way to the department, but to other agencies. So what we're trying to do is tell them, go to our website, look at the agency, go to this page, go here, call them, have a conversation. Maybe Faith Mission will work out a deal with you to sublet your unit. They'll rent all the units out, they'll pay you whatever that they want. And then what they'll do is they'll come back to CSH or through the Returning Home Ohio, whatever, and say, hey, we've got another unit available. State, is there any dollars to increase the contract? Because the demand is there. We know we have people that need the housing. So that's one way. Now, I will tell you this, to be honest, I don't know if it's worked yet, but it should work. If they can make that connection, that's a much easier connection than coming to the state. Because, you know, John Q. Public with the house is not going to be able to normally meet all the requirements.
Well, and that was one of the questions that was submitted on the Whova platform was, as a housing provider, how can I house offenders without risking liability to other residents and or upsetting neighbors? And I don't know if we can offer up or craft a way to not anger neighbors to manage it. But I think part of keeping neighbors happy is to manage the property effectively. And by entering into agreements with existing agencies that have learned their lessons and figured out what works and what doesn't, that might be a way to help mitigate some of that risk.
Right. So and not to dominate, but so for example, some of our housing, the requirements are there has to be video on any ingress and egress. So any in and out of the house, you have to have video, and there'll be a third party that's watching. So one, we know there aren't giant parties going on in the houses. We know who's coming, who's going. The clients know and the clients feel safer in terms of, you know, that this other person that I'm living with, because it's usually a multi unit residence, isn't bringing in a bunch of different strangers and a bunch of people that are going to harm me either. And if kind of switching to that other part of the question in terms of John Q. Public, if that client, if that sex offender at least feels safe in terms of a place to stay, then you can start what Brianne said, start working on all those other issues that individual has. And that's at least one. And that's a huge one. And that is the foundation of everything else. I think most people on here know you got to have housing, you got to have a place to go, you got to have a place to call home, you got to have a place that you feel safe. Then you can start thinking about, how can I change my behaviors? How can I become a better citizen and all of that?
Right. And we had another question in the chat here, where someone joining us from Columbus typed, we've also seen another issue of vigilantes finding out that a registrant lives in their community and then opening a daycare in their home, which forces the individual to move. That was a conversation that Chris and I have had separately, where the application of registration and residency requirements can be so much more punitive than I think the general public realizes, where registrants can find themselves in a position where they can't live in a house that they legally own. And I mean, what a mess. Like, how do you even navigate that? I have not encountered stories of people opening like a home-based daycare deliberately in order to essentially get someone else evicted, but say a few things shock me at this point. That's unusual. We had another question regarding sober living homes. And the question says, one difficulty in effectively serving individuals with a sex offense is helping them get into sober living. And many sober living homes can't be insured if they serve registrants. So our question here is, I'm curious if Kentucky has a similar policy, or if other cities in Ohio may have effective ways to work around this policy. Julius, have you encountered sober living restrictions with sex offenders in Kentucky?
Yeah, so we got three facilities, two for men, one for women. That house about 51 altogether. But yes, we have had that restriction. I mean, have had that vigilante that you're talking about, where people have moved to get them to where anybody after 2006 had to move out, and so yeah, so we've had that, and our laws our policies are pretty, yeah, they're pretty strict when it comes to people having to move out.
Hmm. That's unfortunate. We always are walking the line of sober living is treatment that provides housing supports, not housing. But so many folks need both. And to eliminate that as an option for this population is really tragic. So what can community members do? For those people who believe in change, who want to help communities build the connections and the resources to support people who are making pro-social choices, what can they do? Is there anybody out there who's doing amazing work or models that we should be pursuing and learning about to emulate? Are you guys familiar with anybody out there who's really just killing it on this topic?
So I think RHO is killing it on this topic.
Awesome.
The reason is because we do have support staff for them. So when the neighbors see a support staff person coming in and out of their house, I've literally had people warn me or hand me the notification card, like, be careful, they're a sex offender, like I wouldn't know. But I think having support staff that are seen and that are known by the neighbors has helped the neighbors, I guess, feel more safe with that individual living there, because they do know, hey, can I have your business card? Yeah, if there's any issues, feel free to call. That's our, we are to keep them stably housed. So we do try and let neighbors know, hey, here's our card. If anything happens, let us know. So I do think that having support staff, I think everybody coming from prison really needs heavy support staff, just navigating the channels, because community resources change so quickly. Something that you were allowed to do with a community agency, you may not be allowed to do when you come out of prison. I mean, technology changes. We've had sex offenders, 28 years or something in prison. When they went to prison, it was 1992. A lot has changed since then. And had they not been linked with RHO, I think they would have drowned instead of swimming and flourishing and doing well. I mean, we've had some come out, work with support staff, and graduate from the program. So having, I think, heavy support staff, which we provide with RHO, but having more support staff, I think, would not only provide ease for the community to show, okay, if she feels safe, because I'm a female, obviously, if she feels safe going into this client's home alone, he must not be, very dangerous or etc. It changes their perception of that client. Just seeing that, I'm treating them no different than I treat anybody else. So I think having that support staff really does kind of change people's responses and opinions to even how they engage with them. Even social service agencies, when they find out that they're a sex offender, often have like an attitude change. But if they're there with someone that can help them advocate for themselves and advocate for them, it's been pretty successful.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, that's interesting. No, just please, Joyce.
okay. And I'll piggyback off what Brianna said, is that just having a place, as far as knocking out the water, I wouldn't say that we do that. But just to be in a place for people to come to and feel comfortable in their sex offense, and be able to talk about that, and see people that are willing to fight for them, just fight for them. That's a relief for them. But I'm reluctant to say that we are knocking out the water, because we have so much pushback from the community when it comes to sex offense. I mean, there's a lot of underground work that goes on in finding sex offense housing. It's like people around the state, even in Ohio, it's underground work. It's not, nobody says I'm working with sex offenders, and so it's 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 an underground support system more than anything.
Well, and what an interesting way to put that, Julius, that the work with this population is underground work. I know I've had conversations in the lead up to this panel, essentially talking about the difficulties that motivated individuals would feel walking into a meeting or, you know, a council meeting or local politics, and being the person to say, won't someone think of the sex offenders? Our society does not operate in a way right now where that person that was trying to be an advocate is going to be warmly welcomed for that advocacy. And so the idea that that advocacy has to take place kind of underground, I think is really astute on your part, that we're operating in a political sphere that kind of forces us to not be public about something we know to be important, because we anticipate the reaction if we operate and advocate publicly. What a pickle. What a pickle. So the more time that passes from someone's conviction to the present, we know that the more time they put between that conviction and now, the more opportunities begin to open up. Have any of you found a particularly effective service or process to kind of use in the interim for folks as they try to get, you know, that magical 7 years past release that a lot of employers say that they're looking for? And, you know, we've identified that they can't use the shelter system. What patches have you guys used to get folks to that point where they can be independent? Any pieces and parts that you've stitched together to be like an effective quilt? I think with Brianne, you know, she talks about having the right providers at the table. Mental health treatment and substance abuse treatment and all of those things are especially key. But on the topic of housing, you know, for the average person in a housing crisis, the shelter system, shelter diversion programs, all of those things that we would put together for a client experiencing a housing issue are off the table for this population. Have you found anything to stand in place of that? And if you haven't, it's okay. We need to know that too.
Relationship with a lot of housing providers that might be under the radar, so to speak. And so when I'm working with people, especially when I work with them, preparing reentry plans for them, and I try to work with them, you know, 8 to 12 months before they come home, I start building those relationships now and ask people to hold rooms for me, or look in some populations that accept certain convictions in their housing program. And so it's building those relationships that have helped me bridge that gap. And then working with employment agencies. I only work with a few, right, that can help employ people pretty quickly in jobs that they don't mind working, right? Making prevailing wage while we're working on that plan. So for me, relationship is that gap filler.
And thank you, Ms. Motley. And on the topic of relationships, I know ODRC has invested a lot of time and effort into helping our population maintain family relationships. But as many of our folks leave prisons and may have been able to return to mom. Things like the okay from a landlord, or again, registration requirements, make family unavailable to this particular population as a place to go to. Do you guys encounter a lot of families who try to find other ways to support their returning loved ones?
Yeah, because a lot of the families sometimes are victims themselves of the perpetrators. So
Mhm.
they,
Oh,
they are
sure.
they're looking for some alternative housing methods, and they do help. Sometimes it's not that they don't love their loved ones, but they're not trying to put themselves in a position to be victimized again. And prison doesn't, cure people, right?
Mhm.
That's what happens here. So, but sometimes they help.
Yeah. Brianne, how often are families involved with the population that you serve?
Well, it's hit or miss. We have some family that is very supportive, and then we have other family that's like, yeah, we're not going to be seen with you. We don't want to be affiliated with the name that you have. We're going to change our name to my maiden name, and, want nothing to do with them. So it's really kind of one or the other. There's really no middle. It's either they want to help, they'll do, whatever they can to try and help. Whether or not they can live there, they'll try to find other resources. Or on the other end, it's like, we want nothing to do with this person. We don't ever want to speak to them again. So unfortunately, I would like to see more family support. But unfortunately, we do see less support from family than support from family.
Mm-hmm. Julius, is that your experience as well?
Yeah. Like you said, there's some family members that want to help and some that don't. I think that educating the family and educating, even go back to the last question, even educating those people that want to hear from you, just finding ways to educate them will bring them to the table, because they kind of don't want to come to the table. But if you say like, would you have a 7-year-old that's getting molested or something like that? They're like, yeah, I have a 7-year-old, 17-year-old. Yeah, I have a 17-year-old. But what about 27-year-old and 37-year-old? And just use those tools, because they was molested at 7 and 17, and then now they're perpetrators at 27, 37. So a lot of times just having a way to educate the family and educate people to see that, the sex offense is I don't know, just try to educate them about the sex offense, stuff like that.
Okay.
I do a lot of work with the client on self-advocacy, self-love. Yes, you did make a mistake. No one's denying that, but you need to own that. You don't need to live there. Living in that mistake is going to hinder you for the rest of your life. You have to own that mistake. Yes, I made that mistake. Now, what can we do to move forward? Because we can't live there. We've already done our prison time. We've already, paid our debt to society. Now, how can you advocate for yourself? If you see your neighbor, you can even, mention it. Hey, advocate for yourself. Let them hear your story. Not everything is what it seems on that black and white card. So you need to learn how to advocate for yourself, how to talk about what happened in a way that is comfortable for them. Because, there are situations where I had a client at my last job, met a female in a bar. Come to find out she was underage and now is a registered sex offender. Tell your neighbor that, because that could happen to anybody. You know what I mean? It does not discriminate. You made a mistake. So now we have to figure out how to advocate for ourselves with employers, how to advocate ourselves with landlords, how to advocate for ourselves with mental health providers, because they don't always like to be on medication regimens. And, so teaching them how to advocate for themselves to try and get some stability in the community and be a productive member of society, to not walk out of the house and think, oh my gosh, everybody's staring at me because they know I'm a sex offender. You know, trying to teach them to, hey, keep your head up. You did what you did, but now you're a different person. You do have a chance to have a good life, but it starts now, and it starts with the decisions that you make going forward. So I do a lot of work with the individual themselves to make sure that, they're doing the best they can for themselves with the supports and resources that they have.
Yeah, more so than other members of the returning population. I think this subset of our population almost has to do more work to humanize themselves to other people. And that's definitely a learned skill, how to approach that. That makes a lot of sense. We have a comment in the chat that says there are a number of Central Ohio providers who have been master leasing properties that are location compliant and have been using ERA $2 to fund the sublease agreements for the first 3 months of the lease. Thus far, we've served roughly 7 to 8 registrants. And Chris, I feel like that might speak your language more than mine. Does ERA 2 mean anything to you?
No, I was going to ask what's ERA 2?
Can someone explain ERA 2 to our panel? COVID rent assistance. Okay, got you.
You were able, just a real quick question. You were able to get assistance through Impact for sex offenders? Because anytime they're not allowed to do any of the programming there, they're not allowed to my knowledge, apply for even assistance through those types of programs due to their sex offense.
It sounds like maybe the assistance went to an agency rather than the individual renter, if I'm reading that correctly.
We use a different provider than Impact. Okay.
Yeah, so the second round of ERA dollars allows us to pay rent forward, and then we use a different provider than Impact.
There's
so
underground.
Yes, exactly. That work being done, in private. We won't say secret, but kind of that underground work that creates those opportunities. So for the person who put that comment in the chat, are you able to chime in and let us know how you see, that going forward, what the next year is going to look like for that opportunity? And I'll wait a few minutes because I know sometimes we're joining from groups and it's hard. I think it came from Columbus, but that's okay. All right, Columbus, if you figure it out and want to pop in, let me know.
Jen, can you repeat the question, please? This is Zach Rupel.
Oh, hi, Zach. How goes it?
Good.
Hey, we were looking for the person who chimed in about the ERA dollars being used to create housing opportunities for registrants. I wanted to know how that person sees the next year with that opportunity. How sustainable does it feel? Is there room to expand it?
Yeah, so the city of Columbus was intentional about setting aside dollars to help individuals with justice involvement, and by the grace of God did not put carve-outs in there for types of offense. And so as long as we are doing a master lease with a provider whose home is location compliant, there is no exclusion. We have a home on Refugee Road that have 4 registrants there right now, all on supervision. The parole officers love it. It's got the cameras up, everybody's doing their thing, and it's been very successful. We're able to use those ERA $2 to pay 3 months forward so that they have time to restore their credit, get to work, and then we can help them find their own apartment. And those landlords to provide that apartment do exist, with, again, some kind of underground advocacy. As far as sustainability, there is, I believe, a commitment of additional funding coming, but ERA $2 are supposed to be spent by at least a year from now, if not sooner. So this is where kind of the policy piece comes in of creating this model and then saying, okay, Central Ohio, sustain it. but also thinking about some of the comments that Chris made about partnering as a subcontractor with Returning Home Ohio, as a subcontractor with other larger BCS entities. We're hoping that having created the framework will allow us to now say, we've created this, it's been successful, more capacity is here, and now let's have this conversation. So
yeah, well, and that success is generally going to be needed before anybody allows you to replicate it.
That's right.
That's fantastic. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us. And kind of on the same note, as we move into our last 10-15 minutes here, for Julius, Brianne, and Chris, if each of you were to put together just a dream team to tackle this issue, who would you want on your team? Like, what are the effective pieces that you think need to be present to make progress on increasing opportunities? And I'll let you fight over who goes first.
All right, I'll jump in and
Thank you, Chris.
So first, I would start with as many local people as you possibly can. So getting buy-in from wherever that housing area or issue, or if you happen to have a property that you're trying to do this with, if you can somehow get law enforcement in there, maybe you get, Department of Corrections folks, parole folks, to be able to come in and provide some information about it. My experience has been, it's always a difficult fight. There has not been an easy one anywhere ever. So having the local advocacy, because that at least brings it, this isn't just the state trying to come in here and dump these people here and all this type of stuff. That's usually what, how people see me, just from the seat that I sit in, because I administer it for the whole state. That's, and rightfully so, to a degree, from their perspective. I understand it. So having local folks there, having providers that know what they're doing, that can, provide a good argument for why this is safer and why this is needed, to be able to go through some of those arguments that we kind of laid out a little bit here before. And if somehow you can get someone who's politically connected, good luck with that. But if you're talking dream team, that's what you need, to be able to pull those final strings if there's any zoning and those types of things. Quite, yeah, well, there's things I just can't, I'd like to say personally, but I'm not going to say it because of where I sit. So there's some other things I'd love to see happen.
Yeah. All right. So Chris thinks it's best to start local. Julius, how about you?
Yeah, I think just having if I'm gonna think dream team, I would say people that are forgiving the sex offenders, a team of people that are forgiving. I'll say, like myself, I was born from a molestation. My mother was molested, and I was born from that. So that squashes a lot of people. A lot of times people, I say, oh, you don't think about the perpetrator. And I tell my story and how I overcame that hate for sex offenders. And then now it's come out of abundance of love or whatever. And so I think the whole team, it's a whole community of people that's willing to forgive forgive those sex offenses. And I think if I had a dream team, I would bring those to the table to talk to the politicians, to talk to whoever, because a lot of times they don't want to hear from a sex offender. They don't want to even hear it. But you tell them you're a sex offender somebody that has forgiven that population. I think they take time out and they will listen to you. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Brianne, what about you? Who would be in yours?
I would say investors and contractors, specifically for the tier 3 population. Because if you're a tier 1 and a tier 2, you do have the option to come to shelter, but there's only one shelter here in Columbus, at least that sex offenders can go to. So having some place, whether it be a specialized shelter or something like that for those tier 3 offenders specifically, I think that would be useful. And then that would also give them time to, have a safe place to stay, get linked for those external services, as well as give them time from release to, that length of time that we talked about. The longer you go, the easier it is. So having actually someplace designed to house those extremely vulnerable tier 3 sex offenders, and then maybe even having that one location could change the society's perception. Look, we don't have any issues out of this place. There isn't any riffraff. There isn't any increased crime going on in the area or things like that, to where maybe it could try and change the perception. But I think that those tier 3 not having the availability to even come into shelter, I think is something that I would like to see identified a little bit more.
Yeah, and to circle back with Chris's preference that things start local, that is something to tackle at a county level, to have those local conversations. So the 2 days that we're all spending together here with Building Bridges is about creating movement. And I think we acknowledge that it's really difficult to be the person who walks into a group setting and says, I'm here to advocate for the sex offender population. I'm that person. And we all anticipate pushback. But I think when we talk about creating movement, there's a way to, start local, and doing that by having rational and informed conversations on a one-on-one basis, and asking people who would push back against this kind of work to truly be able to justify their beliefs, to make them say, no, I think we would all be better off if they slept in the woods. I think that would be better off. That's a hard position to justify when you talk about the practicality, when you put it in specifics. And I think nobody expected to come to this panel today and solve this issue. But I do think we can create movement out of this by approaching things individually and locally, and being the person who advocates for sensible practices, logical decisions, and to not let hysteria and paranoia drive large-scale policy. And so I hope that all of you are prepared to do that, and as a continuation of your work in reentry going forward, to be that voice of reason. And if that is, what we get out of the hour we all just spent together, then I think it was an hour well spent. So thank all of you for choosing to make this how you spent this hour. You had a lot of sessions to choose from. Julius, Brianne, and Chris, the prep time we did and carving out, the hour for you to be here and talk to us today, and the larger work that all 3 of you do. Thank you. Keep it up, and we appreciate it. Folks, you can get contact information and make additional connections on the Whova platform. So you can still interact with each other. You don't have to stop just because we're wrapping up here today. So play around with all the features in Whova, continue to have those conversations. And thanks to everybody for being here. Enjoy the rest of the conference. I know tomorrow is going to be another busy day. And take care of yourselves and each other. Thank you, everybody.